Hey friends, sorry it took me a second to get started. I was just tweeting this out so folks will show up. I created the Bookshelf app. You can go to bookshelf.lol and play around with it. And I made that as part of the Epic React course material. And we build that as part of 4 workshops in that. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. And as a couple months after I launched Epic React, version 3 of React Query was released, and I am planning on updating all of Epic React in the near future, hopefully near future. I can't make any promises, but I am planning on updating it, but it may take a little while, and so I wanted to show you all how to update React Query because it is a pretty foundational part of the whole app experience, and a lot of people are using it, really enjoying it, and it'd just be nice to see what the whole app looks like if you're using React Query. And so, yeah, I actually already worked on this and played around with it so that I could make sure that this is as effective a stream as possible for you. And you can feel free to ask me questions and stuff. This one, I will try to keep track of the chat of the YouTube live stream if I can. So feel free to ask me questions, and yeah, I'll do my best to keep up with that. And let me go ahead and share my screen so y'all can see this. Here we go. Bum-ba-da-dum. Here I am in my corner. Okay, like I said, this is the commit. It looks like to make this update, and I didn't really add a feature. Well, I changed a few things. Yeah, we have 188 additions, 100 deletions. Yeah, most of the difference in additions was 73 additions in the package lock. So there not a whole lot of changes, but enough. So the first thing that I did was I went to the migrate React Query, or migrating to React Query 3, and that just listed all the breaking changes. I went top to bottom and made sure that I was either not impacted by the breaking change or I updated things according to the breaking change. Actually, before I do that, I needed to make sure that the app was running and everything, and it is, and so that's good. And so with that, I went to my package.json and I found React Query and React Query DevTools. And it turns out you don't need React Query DevTools anymore. That is shipped as part of React Query, so we can just get rid of that. And then I upgraded this to be 3. Whatever the latest version is. And then you can run npm install to get the latest of all of that. So while that's installing, let's take a look at the breaking changes. So the first and the biggest, most impactful breaking change in version 3 over version 2 is the fact that you can no longer just import the global query cache. And we use that in a handful of places throughout our app. We've got in our setup test, we'll take a look at that. Our auth context, this is probably the biggest, we are impacted here, but the biggest one is, where is it? The context index file. So here's where we're setting the query config and stuff. We actually need to create a query client instead of just query config and putting it in this config provider. So you no longer have access to just the query cache from an import. You need to get it. You need to create your own query client. And that's another thing that I noticed is a lot of things switched from query cache to query client. So here we had query cache prefetch query. Now it's query client prefetch query. So pretty much like a find and replace on query cache and query client for lots of things. And then just the way that you access it is different. So yeah, let's start with this first one, moving to creating our own query client. So let's do that. Coming over to here where we're configuring our query, our React query. Now we're going to be creating a query cache and passing this configuration. So we'll say client or query client equals a new query client. And then our config starts with default options. So these are going to be the default options for our queries. There we go. And we'll move all of these down here. And that's our query client. That's going to come from React Query. Okay, sweet. So now we've got our query client, and this is going to be a client that we pass to the React Query config provider. So let's go ahead and we'll save that. Let me just check something here real quick. Okay, sweet. So we've created that. We put our config in the right spot. So now, instead of the React Query Client provider, or what is it? React Query Config provider, it's now the React Query Client provider. So let's come over here. We'll swap those out. And then that prop is no longer config, it's client. And that takes care of that. Query cache is gone, so we're going to get rid of all query cache references here in a second. We don't use make query cache, so I don't need to worry about that. But we do use prefetch query, so let's find that. And this is where things start to get like, oh, okay, now I've got to refactor a lot of things. But none of it is really enormous or anything. So yeah, basically I'm just going to do multiple cursor stuff, and we're going to switch this to query client, because this is all on query client now and none of it's on query cache. And then we can get rid of that import because we're no longer able to import that. This is being created by our context module here, where we're creating the query client. We're sticking that into the provider. Now we need to pull that out of the provider everywhere, and we're going to use a hook for that. So this is going to be use, let's see, what is it? Query client, I think. Did my npm install maybe? Sorry, I'm going to reload my window so that autocomplete works, because that should, pretty sure it should be use query client. Yes. Yeah, so use query client is what we want, and that should autocomplete now. Query client? Maybe, I don't know why. But that's how we get the query client. This one's a little tricky. We'll take a look at that in a sec. Yeah, so right here, this is a hook, and so I can use other hooks in it. So we'll say use query client. Here's our query client. And there we go. Now we have our query client. ESLint is telling us we need to include that in our dependency array, which of course we do. And then, yeah, so now that's working. So here's two tricky parts because of the way that this works now. So now that we can't just import the query client anywhere we want, we have to use hooks everywhere. Now, you might think, okay, well, Kent, why can't, like, just because you're the one creating it doesn't mean you can't just put it in a module and have it be imported anywhere that you want. And yes, that's true, but there are pretty good reasons for putting things inside of context. And the biggest one has to do with server rendering. So if you are server rendering your application and one user comes and makes a request, and like you're set up some context or something, and another user makes a request and set up some other context, it's possible, not likely, but it's possible that one user could get access to another user's data. And because of that possibility, and because the workaround to avoid that problem isn't such a huge deal, it's better to just focus on the workaround. And because of that and the fact that this is an educational content, and I want to make sure that people will learn the best sorts of practices to avoid those kinds of problems, I want to teach how to do it in the way that's most scalable, regardless of what you end up, whether you're server rendering or client rendering. So for that reason, we're not just going to export this and import it everywhere. Instead, we're going to use the hooks. So where things get tricky is this is not a hook. This is a utility function, and that same thing applies right here. This is also not a hook. It's a utility function. And so because it's not a hook, we can't say use query client to get the query client, because this may or may not be running within the context of the render phase of a React component rendering. So what we're going to do is we're going to require that anybody who calls this function pass us the query client. So we're going to change the API for this get book search config thing really quick. And luckily for us, both of these calls are within the same file, so it's pretty easy to fix that. So let me just grab this to get our query client right here, and then we'll pass that along, query client. And then the other one is just right here, and we've already got the query client right here. So we'll just pass the query client, oh, whoops, right as the first argument here. Okay, simple enough. That one's easy. This one's a little bit more tricky because this is used in two separate files. So we're going to do the same thing here though, query client as an argument. And now we have access to the query client. And then we'll go over to here. Yeah. So we need the query client as the first argument in this one. So that was the books file. That one's, I think this is all done actually. I don't think we need to touch this books file anymore. Now it's the list items, which is very similar. It's a collection of hooks for managing this, this particular resource with React Query. So we no longer have the query cache, get rid of that. But we are going to say use query client. There we go. There's my autocomplete. And now we'll just paste that hook usage right there, and we get access to the query client. We can pass that to set query data for book. And then down here, this is where things get a little tricky. I'm going to hold off on the mutations. Let's just get everything else updated. So on update mutation, that one's not a hook. That's a utility function. We'll look at that here in a sec. But this one is a hook, so this one's easy. Let's take care of that one. All these query cache references are going to be query client. Okay, sweet. Now this one is actually pretty easy as well. This on update mutation, it's only used in one place. I'm not exactly sure why I extracted it to be a function, because there's not really any reason for it to be. So we're going to just inline it right here. And then I can say, get that query client, and these can be updated like so. So there we go. That works nicely. So then the last one in the list items file is this on settled for the query cache. So actually, let's take a step back and remember here we can set up our query client to have some default options for queries. We can actually also have it default for mutations as well. And these are our default mutation options. It kind of makes sense that like maybe some of these would be more interesting and useful as like global options. And in particular, this on error option basically allows us to recover from errors in like, so in particular, this is useful for optimistic updates, and we build this together as part of Epic React. So if you're not familiar with what this does or what this is for, once you get through this part of Epic React, you'll understand. But basically this on error handler, or this mutation option, just allows us to say if this particular mutation allowed for some sort of recovery for what happens when an error happens, then let's call that recovery. And that makes sense as a good default. So I'm actually going to remove this right here, and we'll stick it right there. So as a default for our mutations, if there's an error, then we'll check if there's a recovery function. And if there is, then we'll call it. So that takes care of that half of things. That's not really exactly related to the query cache problem that we're in right now. But it just kind of was one thing I noticed as I was working on this. I was like, that actually would probably make more sense over there as part of the client configuration. Okay, cool. So the query cache. For this one, it's actually pretty easy. This default mutation options isn't all that useful. It's just giving us one option, a handful of characters that I am more than happy to just duplicate. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to just stick that right there. And this will now be query client. We already have access to the query client from above, so that works out nicely. And then right here, and this will be query client. I should just copy that. And then right here, and now we just need to say use client, or whoops, use, where is it? There it is. Use query client, and we're off to the races. We no longer need this default mutation options anymore. And that takes care of our list items file. I don't think we need to modify anything else in here. So it just came down to, for both the list items and the book collection of hooks, all that you needed to do was switch from query cache, importing query cache, to importing the use query client, and then kind of changing the arguments of some functions so that you could pass around the query client that you get from a hook. And that way, this will actually work better for server rendering anyway, so it ends up working nicely. Okay, cool. I just noticed there are some comments from YouTube. Keep them coming. I'm going to answer them at the end so that we can keep this flowing as we're going. So yeah, keep those comments coming, and I'll put them all together as answers at the end. All right, sweet. So that takes care of those two files, and I think that was that's as far as I wanted to go at this point. So let's go back to our breaking changes list and just make sure that we get these answered or addressed. So yeah, we took care of prefetch query. Let me just double check that. I'm pretty sure we've got all, yeah. So it's a query client now. Yeah, I never knew this, or I think I may have known this, but I just never, this may have come after Epic React was launched. But the React query error reset boundary. So they have this error reset boundary thing that's kind of interesting. It integrates really nicely with React error boundary, where you can actually reset the, I'm guessing what this allows you to do is reset the query cache so that it'll refetch all of the queries again. So it allows you to say, hey, the user, we had some problem getting everything. And so you say, okay, well, let's reset the query, everything, and all the queries will get refetched again. Hopefully it works this time or something, which was interesting. But we're not using any of that in this project, so we can skip that. We're not using getQuery or getQueries at all, so that one works. This is fetching one is interesting, and I did actually fix this when I was first going through this, but we actually are going to get rid of this entirely in a little bit, so I'm not going to bother. But if you do have an is fetching, that's literally all you need to change is invoke is fetching. So I'll change that for the fun of it, but that's it. And it returns the number of queries that are currently fetching, which is super weird. I don't know why, but why that is, but I think it may even make sense to return the queries that are currently fetching. I don't know. Yeah, but it works. It works for us. It may make more sense if is fetching is just a Boolean that indicates whether it's fetching any queries, but that's what it is. In any case, we're not going to need it, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Okay, so we were never using the use query cache, so we can skip over that one. This one was kind of interesting. Querying key parts pieces no longer automatically spread in the query function. We're not doing that either. At least I don't, yeah, I didn't think to double check that, but the app is working and all the tests are running. But let's go double check for sure. So yeah, our use query, here's our query function. And all of my stuff is just the object form rather than the separate arguments form. So I can just search for query fn and we'll see we have a query. Yeah, all of those aren't accepting any arguments. So we're covered on this as well. We don't need to worry about that. Okay, infinite. Yeah, we're not doing any infinite scroll or pagination or anything like that. So although when I was working on this, I realized that our discover page probably could implement some of that. Like as you scroll, we just load more books, and I think that would make a lot of sense. So maybe when I redo all of this in the future, we'll do something like that. I think that would be pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, this one impacted us. Use mutation now returns an object instead of an array. So that's interesting, but also at the same time when I read that, I also saw that this mutation object, the mutate function, no longer returns a promise, which does impact us as well. So I'm going to make both of these changes. Now, if you want it to return a promise, then you use mutate async. So we're going to have some where we just care about mutate and others where we actually want to get that promise back. So let's find all of our use mutation calls, and they're all in the list items. So we've got use update list item, and that is coming. Let's do the book, or no, yeah, let's do the rating first. Okay, so this one's really easy. If we look at where mutate is being used, then you'll see that it's in this onChange, and we're not returning the promise or anything, so we actually don't care about whether it returns a promise. It doesn't impact us at all. And so all we need to do is say, hey, this is no longer an array, this is going to be just an object, and we destructure all the properties off of that, and that's it for the rating. We have a similar thing for our book right here. If we look at the mutate, this is actually getting debounced. And then we look at the debounce call, and we're just ignoring the any promise that would have been returned anyway, so it's not a big deal. And we can get rid of the array there and just grab mutate off of the object. I like this API better. I'm happy for this change. This is nice. Okay, so where things get a little bit more tricky is over here in our status buttons. First of all, I used to have this throw on error, and you know what? It just occurred to me that I never went back and double checked what happened. So if please somebody maybe write in a comment, say double check the throw on error config, because I forgot to double check that. But I couldn't find this in the TypeScript definitions or anything, and I couldn't see anything in the migration docs. So this may have been missed, but I'm pretty sure it's probably handled, but we do need to double check that. So if somebody could just add a comment, double check the throw on error config, that would be great. But I removed that because it's not in the TypeScript definitions or anything else. So thank you, Michal, in the Discord. He just mentioned that. Okay, so yeah, we're going to get mutate, but this one's special. So if we look at this, we are doing an arrow function with an implicit return. So let's look at where onClick is being called, and it's being called inside of this tooltip button, and we're passing that promise that was returned to run, and that's just so that we can keep track of the state of that promise, so we can display different things based on the state. So this is the when you add a book to your reading list. Here, I think I messed everything up locally now. It's all busted. Oh, yeah, maybe not, but I'm not going to chance it. So here, if we go over here, voice of war, there we go. And if we click on this, you're going to see the spinner. So that spinning interaction, all of that stuff is being managed by the useAsync run function right there. And we need to make sure that we have a handle on that promise so that we can keep track of what the state of the promise is so we can display the right stuff. So for this case, we actually do want this to be mutate async. And I think I aliased this to update because I kind of felt like that made more sense. So in the final version, I have a branch with all my changes that you can go review and take a look at. And I'm pretty sure in that I call this update. Okay, so for both of these, they also are using the tooltip button, and so they also will need to be mutate async. So we're going to say mutate async and alias that to handle remove click, and mutate async is handle remove click. And I just realized I didn't explain to you that this use remove list item is just calling use mutation, and so is the use create list item, and they're both just returning. So that's why I'm able to do it this way. Okay, cool. So I think that's everything. Use mutation. Yeah, so that was all three, and we're using all three of them right there. So let me just double check this. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that takes care of our mutations. Making sure that we're handling that new syntax. See, most of this stuff is pretty simple. I didn't spend a lot of time beforehand double checking that everything was all good or whatever. Or like it just didn't take me a lot of time to upgrade, and that's why I've not been super like urgently concerned about getting all of this re-recorded, because there isn't a whole lot of changes. It's pretty straightforward. But continuing. Yeah, object syntax for use query now uses a collapsed config. So it used to be that you pass a config. Now you just put it all directly on, which, you know what? Actually, I didn't check that one, but I don't think that we, no, it looks like we do. Whew. Yeah, let's stick that one on here. Let's just double check with the typings that this is correct. So on success. This actually, JavaScript isn't smart enough. TypeScript would be though, and that is another thing that's coming. So let me just make sure right over here. I just want to make sure that the typings are going to help me with this on success. Yeah, okay. So this is where the config is going to go, and so with that, we're going to need to double check that this anywhere that uses use list item, if it provides config, we also handle those. So yeah, I didn't update that one. We'll just make sure that is updated properly. So let me just get rid of these other things here. Okay, so for our use book search config, this on success will need to go on the root level right there. And our list items here, this on success, will need to go right there. Whoops, there we go. And so then, there we go. That's the refactor right there. The same behavior we'll have now. And then we'll want to make sure that, whoops. Yeah, there we go. Actually, we don't need that question there because we're defaulting this to an object anyway. So options on success, if that's defined, then we'll call that, and then we'll do our thing. So that's kind of merging those on success handlers. Okay, sweet. So let's find other, I don't think that we're using config anywhere else based on this, but let's just double check this because I was handling that situation. Yeah, see, I'm not calling that at all. So we're good. All right, sweet. So then the next thing, let's just keep on rolling on down. If set the query options enabled, option must be true or false, must be a Boolean. That works out fine for us. We're actually not using that feature. Initial stale, I don't think I was using that, but let's just double check. Yeah, I don't think so. Force fetch on mount, wasn't using that. Refetch on mount, wasn't using that. Query function parameters filter, nope. Notify, nope. Actually, yeah, let's double check, but I don't think so. Yeah. Yes, we were using clear, and now that's been removed or changed to remove. So clear. And here's some more query cache stuff. This is part of our setup tests. We'll get to this. Trying to decide when to get to this. We'll get to this soon, so we'll skip that. Auth context. So this one's interesting. Let's see. Just want to make sure to do this in an order that makes the most sense. And then API client. Yeah, we've got the query cache here also. Oh, shoot. Now I can't remember what I did with that. Hold on a second. Oh, right. Yeah. So for this one, it actually doesn't matter. We don't need to clear the query cache because we refresh the page anyway. And so it's not a big deal. I'm pretty sure that's what I did is I just deleted it entirely. Yeah, we just deleted it. Yep. So because we refreshed the page anyway, it doesn't make any difference on whether we're going to clear the query cache. So I just deleted that. And because we had a test for this specific thing, we actually mocked out the React query so we could test that. We don't need to do that anymore because we're not interacting with the query cache anyway. So we just get rid of all that. And so that was API client. DevTools, that's a different clear. Let's see. Yeah, let's do the auth context one. Okay, so for this one, actually it's not all that bad. Here we say use query client right here. We're gonna get our const query client. Yeah, there it is, right there. And now this query cache is now just the query client. I'm guessing that this is stable. It seems to be stable that the query client would be. I'm the one who creates it and I don't ever change it. So that makes sense to me. So we don't need to worry about that. And then right here, we run into another problem because the query cache is not defined. Oh, and I forgot earlier, we updated the set query data for book to accept the query client. If we were using TypeScript, then we would have caught that too. But that also needs to accept the query client. So how do we get this? Remember, this is not a hook, so I can't use the use query data for book hook for this. So I'm going to accept this as an argument. So query client, and then query client, set query data. And then down here where we're calling that, we'll pass the query client, and that's where we can get it from the hook. So that ends up working out nicely, and we just stick that in our dependency array. So no biggie right there. That's fine. Okay, sweet. So let's keep on rolling down here. Yeah, we didn't need to worry about the console stuff. React Native, TypeScript, new features, a bunch of cool new features, but we're just trying to make our stuff work. So that was it. So now, if we were to run the test, things are going to be totally borked. And the reason that they're not going to work is because before, our tests were importing the query cache, but we no longer have the query cache to import. So where are we going to get that query cache? So when I initially was working on this, I thought, well, I don't really like doing this, but it seems like this is going to be the only way. And I exported the query client, and I was going to add this big comment that said, don't do this. Like, this is just for testing. Nobody should be using this. Here's the reason why you shouldn't, and here's what you should do instead. And then I imported it here. And I ran into a problem with the auth context because, or let's see, what was it? Yeah, it was the API client test because yeah, I can't remember. I ran into a problem and then it made me rethink it. And I was like, wait a second. I would actually much rather just have the client be scoped to a particular React tree and not, when we're testing, we're making a bunch of React trees. Like every time you call render, that's a totally different React app, okay? And I don't want those to all be referencing the same query cache. I'd rather them all be, or query client, rather than have their own, right? And when you have their own like that, you actually don't need to worry about clearing the query cache or waiting for it to finish fetching. Who cares? It's fine. It works out. It ends up working out just fine. So we can get rid of that and we can get rid of this. And that ends up cleaning up a bunch of stuff. Like this was really hard to make work and now we don't have to worry about it because of the change that I'm about to make. So to make sure that everything is using the exact same query client, sorry, let me take a step back. To make sure that they're all using their own query client, I need to create the query client within the context of the app providers. And as I was thinking about this, I was like, yeah, it might make more sense to separate this out and say, here's the file for all the query client stuff. And so here we're going to say query client. I think that's what I called it. And we'll put all of our query client, well, we'll just copy all this and we'll remove what we don't need. So we don't need that, and therefore don't need that. Whoa, whoops. And don't need that, or this. Okay. And then we're definitely not going to need to export the query client because we're actually going to create the query client inside of our provider. And I'm actually going to call this the query client provider, and we'll alias this to RQ provider. I can't remember if that's what I called it in the end, but this is what we're going to call it now. So yeah, this is going to be called our query client provider. And it's going to be responsible for creating the query client. Don't worry, I'm not done. We're not going to do this. We'll get to this. But we are going to come over here and we'll import from our query client the query client provider. We can get rid of that and get rid of all this nonsense. Whoops. That wasn't nonsense. That was actually really important. There we go. And we don't want to export that. Okay, so now this is all of our providers just being rendered in one file. And this is the file responsible for the query client. Now, I mentioned that we're not done here. We're going to keep fixing this. Now, we actually probably be okay here because there's no way that this app providers can re-render. If we look at the way that this happens, this load devtools is not going to trigger this to get called again. We have no state going on in here at all. App providers doesn't have any state in itself. The auth provider does, but that will only trigger a re-render from here on down. And even if the auth providers was further up, because of the way that React works, it still wouldn't re-render the query client provider. So like we are pretty positive that this is actually fine. This will never get re-rendered. You can take that to the bank almost. But like there's just something inside of me that says, wow, don't do this because like you're creating an entirely new query client that every single render, we don't need to do that. There's no reason to do that. And if somebody were to say, oh, I need to like manage some state here, whoops. There we go. Now all of a sudden we're creating a new query client every time. So I just feel better to like avoid this problem altogether by making this constant. And I actually have a favorite hook for this. It's called use constant. And it takes a function and it returns React use state function, oops, 1, or sorry, 0. There we go. And that is use constant. So this is kind of abusing use state a little bit. Basically, well, here, let me show you how this is going to be used first. And we'll come down here. There we go. That's it. So what this is doing is it's abusing the fact that use state allows you to provide a lazy initializer. So that's our function right here. And whatever you return, it's going to be the initial state for that particular state. And then we don't care about the state updater. We're just passing 0, which is going to just get us the state. And then we never update the state. This is the most reliable way to avoid any, well, okay, so I think I can't remember whether this function is going to get recalled when on fast refresh, but I don't think it is. I'm 99% positive it's not. So it's a really reliable way to make sure that whatever you create remains constant for the lifetime of the component, which is exactly what we want. So now we have our query client. I'm sure I'm seeing a bunch of comments coming in here, and I'll just remind everybody, I'll look at all of this stuff after I finish going through. I'm almost finished, and then I'll get to the questions and stuff like that in comments. Okay, so this is my favorite use constant hook. And now we've got our client, we're passing that along, and we don't need to worry about this re-rendering. And what's cool about this now is that any time I render the app or render these app providers or whatever, they're all going to have their very own query client. And so I won't need to worry about other tests interacting with that same query client. They're all fine. Ends up working out a lot nicer. Okay, great. So our setup tests, that should be done. And let's see, I think the only thing left is the devtools. Let me just come over here and we'll run our tests really quick just to make sure that all of the tests work, because the devtools, we don't have anything for the tests with the devtools. And as always, when I'm live streaming, everything's a lot slower. But here we go. Come on, you can do it. I know it. Okay, sweet. So all impacted tests are passing. I'll just run them all just for the fun of it. But yeah, this everything should be working at this point. And in fact, I believe I'm still running. Nope, I'm not running the server anymore. So let me just wait for that and done. Okay, good. So nope, and our S npm run start. That's an alias there. Okay, here we go. What? That should not have opened up in that window, but that's okay. Okay, and that. Boy, using Remix for a little while and then coming back to create React app, it's like, man, this takes forever. It's just a small app. Come on. ESBuild is fast, my friends. ESBuild is fast. And of course, I am live streaming too, so it takes a second longer. Okay, DevTools has got a problem. Oh, right, yes. Okay, so I do need to fix one thing about DevTools just for things to work. I have my own version of DevTools installed, or like our own DevTools, and you can actually look at that if you go to the production app, and on any page you just add the question mark DevTools is true, and that will load DevTools in production, and then you can play around with this. And you'll notice I have React Query in here, and it's awesome. So like this is older version of DevTools, but woo! And you see all the React Query awesomeness, and you can simulate request failures and all of that stuff. Highly recommend this, and I have a blog post about it. You can go take a look at how to set something like that up. But this is a key interesting thing, and I think I noticed Tanner was commenting. Tanner, one really nice feature would be the ability to have DevTools actually load in production, so I don't have to do the workaround I'm about to do. Because if you do it right, then it won't actually load in production unless you opt in like I did with that query string. Anyway, I've got my DevTools right here, and with the old version, I was saying React Query DevTools. Now that's not a thing. Now it's React Query /DevTools. But if you do this, then it will not work in production. So that doesn't work for me because I want to be able to use it in production. I just don't want, I just figure it out to make it so that the DevTools aren't loaded except when you opt in. So I trace the dependencies around in the file system and everything, and now I just say ES/DevTools, and that will make sure that I get the latest version of DevTools and stuff. So you're good, Tanner. No, you're fine. And you're right. The decision that you made to say let's not load anything in production, it's probably the correct answer. And so maybe don't change anything. Just make sure that it is possible to import the DevTools directly in the future. If you ever use like the package.json exports feature, just make sure it's possible for me to load that directly, so I can opt in to making sure that loads in production. Okay, cool. Anyway, so that should work. There are a couple of other changes then that I need to make for this all to work properly, so that it gets the right query cache. That's actually a bit of a headache, which we will look at here in a second. But the app should absolutely be working. And if we refresh now, it is. And yeah, so we can come in here, and if I go back to Discover, you'll notice it's all like preloaded. I prefetch the books. We go, or let's see, Brandon. We got a lot of Brandon Sanderson in here. Come back, and we're all back. Everything is working as it should, and so we're happy about this. Yeah, and we can add things to our reading list, and we can say it's done, and we can give it a 4-star rating, and we can say, sweet, yo, everything's working exactly as it was before all of these changes. One thing I just noticed though, and I think I actually noticed this in production here. No. Yeah, I think we may have something busted with the optimistic updates, maybe? No, it seems to be working. I don't know what I was thinking. Yeah, there it is right there. So I selected it, I moused off, and then it showed only 3. That one's a little tricky. I don't have time to dig into that one, but if somebody wants to like investigate it and figure out what went wrong, yeah, right there, feel free. I think I reproduced that even before the upgrade to React Query v3 though. So yeah, there it is. So that has nothing to do with v3 of React Query. So anyway, and I remember building that, and that was tough. So I'm not surprised that I broke it at some point. Okay. So let's see, what was the other thing? Yeah, I guess it's just the DevTools is left. And then I wanted to test out the throw on error config option that is no longer present, and want to make sure that whatever feature that was for is still working. So here's the problem with DevTools. If I come over and I scroll down, kaboom, we get this giant error that says, hey, no query client set, use query client provider to set one. And so where that's happening is in the React Query DevTools panel, I need to put a, what is it called? The query client provider. All right, sweet, I can do that, no problem. We'll put that right there, all's good. And then it's like, oh, no, you need to have a client in here. And here, let's grab that query client provider from React. Actually, I've got React Query, there we go. Why not? Sure. But we need to provide a client. So here's the real trick. This is the thing that took me more than 5 minutes to figure out what to do. I tried a couple different things and finally landed on something that I don't absolutely hate. I just mostly sort of hate. And that is, how do I get the client? Before, I could just import the query cache, and that ended up working. That's what React Query DevTools would do, is just import the query cache. But now we don't have a shared query cache. So I need to know what the query client is that is created, but that's all within the context of this React application, which is totally separate. It's a totally separate React root and everything from my DevTools, and that's very intentional. I don't want the DevTools messing with the React root of my app. And so you'll notice here it's React DOM.render. We render the DevTools to a special DevTools element that we add to the page. So how do I get the query client from my app to my DevTools? Well, I'm not entirely proud of this, but I'm going to show you what I did. So we're going to make a variable on window.devtools, and we're going to have a function on here called set query client. And then I'm going to say let latest query client initialize to null, and I'm going to make a re-render function. That's just a no op right here. And we're going to say latest query client is client, and we'll say re-render. We'll call that. And then I'm going to make a hook right here called use. I think I just called it, or no, I think I called it use latest. No, I can't remember. Let me find out. I don't want to be confusing. Use query, or let's see, function use query, no, use latest. Yep, I did call it use latest query client. Use latest query client. Okay, so now you ready for another fun little trick? We're going to say re-render is React use reducer return an empty object every time. So it's a brand new object every time. And we'll grab the dispatch off of that. So that's what our re-render is. Anytime we call this, that'll trigger a re-render. That's like a force re-render sort of thing. And then we'll just return the latest query client. And with that now, if I ever get that latest query client, I'll show you how I get that here in a second. You might be able to surmise. Now I can get that query client. So right in here, I'll say query client is use latest query client. And then we'll come down to where we're supposed to provide the client, and we just stick it right in there. And then in fact, if we don't have a query client for some reason, then we don't want to render this at all. And instead we'll say no query client initialized or set or whatever you want to say for that. Okay, so now we're not going to get the explosion, but we're also not going to get our query provider or our DevTools here. So here, no query client initialized. So no fun. That's unfortunate. But if we come over here where we create our query client, this is the part. I don't mind hacking weird things together in my DevTools. I'm not a huge fan of interacting with those DevTools from my app code, but I may make exceptions when there's no like clean alternative. It's kind of like why people buy electric vehicles when they're more expensive and whatever. It's because there's no clean alternative, right? So here we're going to make our client, and then down here we'll return our client. Okay, so that's just a refactor. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to say window.devtools. And the reason I can do window here is because this is not server rendered. If it was, then you'd need like a type of or whatever. And anyway, here we have window.devtools set query client. But I'm going to say if that doesn't exist, then that's fine. I'll do nothing. And a situation where it might not exist is if we ended up not loading the DevTools. So if we don't end up loading the DevTools, this will do nothing. And it's like how many characters extra. Yeah, I'm totally cool with this. You could wrap this in a if process env whatever, but then you wouldn't be able to use DevTools in production. So I'm pretty happy with this. This is fine. So yeah, we'll set the query client to the client, and that's it. Now we can refresh, and we get our query client, and there it is. Now we're going to get this warning, and I'll show you that right now, actually. So what's going on is as we're creating this state, we're calling this function, which in turn sets the latest query client and calls re-render. So we're calling re-render while we're getting the initial state of a different component. Even though these are in different trees, React is still not super happy with that. And so a really easy way to get around that is with a set timeout, except you got to spell it right, otherwise it won't work. There we go. So we call set timeout, and now we get rid of the error, and everything is just fine, and it works. One bug, Tanner, if you're still here. Oh, he's just said he's got to go. Dang it, somebody tweet at him. I noticed that if I leave this open, as I navigate around, oh. Yeah, as I navigate around, I'm not getting all the updates of everything like I would expect. Like, I should be getting more book information. And one thing that I noticed is if I let it unrender itself and then I pull this open, then I see all of this stuff. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I think that's not my bug. Hopefully it's not mine. Anyway, that's everything. And I just remembered that I am going with my family somewhere, and so I can't stay for very long. So I'm going to be really quick and just message my wife to let her know that I'm coming. I'll be up in a few minutes. Sorry. Okay. I'll be quick. Okay, let me just answer the questions that I see here really quick, as quickly as possible. And yeah, so the throw on error config, I don't have time to look into that. If anybody wants to investigate that, okay, I do have a second here. So what we need to do is we come over here, and yeah, the easiest way is to say 100% of our requests are going to fail. Let's keep this open. And then if I click on this, then it should fail. Yeah, so that is actually a problem. Oh, I think it may be retrying. Yeah, request failure. So this is actually a problem. We need to figure out why yeah, why that is happening. So what should be happening is I should be able to catch that and just display like an inline error rather than having it do an error boundary and stuff. So that would be something to look into a little further, which I don't have time to do right now. Okay, and Michal in the Discord is where I'm looking at in our list items. Use list items. Yeah, I think we're covered. We probably covered it afterwards. Oh, and TK Dodo. I don't know if that's how you say that, but actually, I believe you're a maintainer of React Query, which is awesome. Throw an error doesn't exist anymore. Mutate async will always throw errors because it returns a promise, so you need to catch them manually. Mutate catches and ignores all errors and discards the promise. Okay, so there's probably some sort of integration that I'm missing there, which is why that's not working properly. Because I definitely should be catching the error. Oh, you know what? I think I know what's going on. Let's, status buttons. So if we go right here and say .catch, maybe, actually that probably isn't it. Yeah, I'm pretty confident this isn't going to fix it. But let's just try it really quick. Okay, then bump this up to 100% again. And we click this. It should just give me an error right there, but it's, yeah, that's not working. Well, here, let's wait. Yeah, that's not working. So I need to figure out what's going on there. If anybody wants to dig in, feel free. Yeah, so the question about this use constant thing. So with use memo and use callback, it's possible that in the future React will actually call your callback even when dependencies don't change, just to free up memory. And I don't want that to happen in this case. And so that's where use constant would be useful. There are actually a couple modules on NPM that do this. They don't do it like this. They use ref and stuff. I'm not sure why they don't do this. This is bulletproof. This will work always. So yeah, that's why I haven't like published this or anything. It's like 6 characters. So, okay, maybe it's more than 6, but anyway. And yeah, using an empty dependency array will not work reliably for what I'm trying to accomplish. I mean, it might, but yeah, it might. This is just so easy. Like, I don't know why I would do it any other way. Let's see. Strict mode, double invokes, functions, pass to use state, use memo. It won't be a big deal because we're not doing actually any side effects here. And so that will not be a problem. But that's actually a good point. In strict mode, this function, I believe, does get called twice. Does it? Yeah, I suppose it does. That's interesting. Practically, we won't have a problem, but maybe that's why the other libraries do the ref trick with for use constant. Maybe if you want use constant, then get a library. They'll probably be better off. No, you should spread options on. All right, hold on a second. Let me take a look. Oh yes, you're right. You're right. Thank you. Because I was if options provided an on success, then we'd override the on success. So yeah, you're right. Thank you for that, Michal. Okay, I gotta be quick. Let me just look at, oh my goodness, so many YouTube comments. Lots of helpful, friendly folk. Lots of questions unrelated to what I was sharing, so I'm not going to address those. Yeah, so the biggest reason that you should not export the query client and just import it everywhere is for server rendering. If you're just doing client-side stuff for everything, then feel free. But for server rendering, you can wind up with situations where one user initializes the query cache with some of their data, and then another user comes by later and they get that data. And that's just a node problem in general. So you really want to avoid doing that if you're ever going to be server rendering any of your stuff. So it's better to stick it inside of context and then initialize it within the context of a single request. and then have it go away after that request is done. If you need it persisted, then you put it in a database somewhere and retrieve it per request. Thanks for all the nice comments from folks. That's nice of you. Almost done. I've got to go. Okay. Yeah, I think we got it all. Sorry that I didn't have more time for questions. So yeah, I've got to run. Thanks everybody for hanging out. There will be a branch that has all of this. I'll need to fix this options thing and a couple other things, but there is a branch right now. You can go take a look at it. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you in the future. Goodbye.